Today on this pop-up live stream with Nimdzi Insight, and I am joined today by my colleague Hannah Leske. Welcome, Hannah. This will be your first public debut, I would say, with Nimdzi, is it not?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, first live stream at least that I've ever done. So
Well,
yeah.
good. And it's perfect timing, and I just brought your levels up a little bit. It's perfect timing because you are working on a report on the Australian and Indigenous languages. That's what we're going to be talking about today, and it is Friday in Australia. So I think this is probably going to be one of the last things that you do today. Hopefully, this is going to be one of the last ththings that you do today.
Yeah, it's about midday, so I've got a bit of time left. But yeah, looking forward to the weekend. Um, yeah, so I've recently looked at Indigenous languages in Australia. It's sort of part of a larger report that I'll be looking into, hopefully, about the LSP industry in Australia. But that one sort of just started. So I started out sort of like a personal interest more than anything about the Indigenous languages and the interpreting and translation services available in Australia. And yes, I've just written up a bit of a report about that. So it should be released on Nimdzi, I reckon, in the coming month or so. So
Who
we'll have
knows?
to
Who
see.
knows? All we need is a client to want to pay money for it, and that'll get prioritized right away. I
Yeah,
think, but
exactly.
it's coming. It's coming soon. Well, let's dive right into it, shall we? We've got it all queued up here. Oh, and of course I'm on the wrong screen, though. I don't want to start here. I want to start. Let's try this again here. Bam. No, it's not gonna let me do that either. All right. What is this? What is this mess of colors on my screen here?
So this is it's probably the most common map that we see of Indigenous languages in Australia. And it should have, I just put it up there because it shows the huge range of languages that there are. So I think there was estimated to be some like 300 languages or languages and dialects before white settlement in Australia. And this shows sort of like I think most of those languages and based on the different regions and language groups. Now, obviously, there's less languages spoken, and that was sort of part of what my research focused on. But that's what that map is. That
So,
shows all the different
of
language
those
groups.
300, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead, but of those 300, about how many are left today?
I think the last estimated number was based on the census in 2016, and that was about 175 that are still spoken.
Okay.
But of that, so it's difficult to get these numbers because a lot of like the census can be difficult to access some of the Indigenous communities sort of in Central Australia and that sort of thing. But yeah, so the numbers that they got from that, I think the largest language group had 4,000 and something languages speakers. Sorry, and then the average number of speakers per language was more like 180. So there was a lot of
Really?
language, very very few
Really?
speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I've never oh my gosh. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask this, but I need to know this. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. I've been doing this for 12 hours now. But the Endangered Alphabets Initiative, has Renato sent that over to you at any
No,
point?
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, we need to get you in touch with, the name is escaping me. I'm sorry. I'm going to find out who you are and tag you in the comments so that you can go make fun of me. But yeah, it's this initiative to save endangered scripts. I mean, it's more talking about alphabets around the world, and what we're talking about today is a little bit different because we're talking about spoken languages.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you want me to go to any of these slides, you just kick me and I can go
Yeah,
from
that's
slide to
okay.
slide.
Yeah.
So,
Yes. This was sort of what I was just saying on the last bit. So just the number of speakers has dropped. And so I suppose my interest was sparked initially. I'm not sure if this is relevant to what we're necessarily discussing, but my interest was sparked because the number of Indigenous speakers is so few. And so predominantly, there's a whole lot of endangered languages in the world, but disproportionately they are Indigenous languages of like colonized or post-colonial countries. And a lot of that's due to, and this is true all over the world, you've got America and there's all sorts of places where this is the case, but obviously colonial settlers came in and basically just wanted to wipe out Indigenous populations, more or less.
This is your white guilt driving this research project. I'll be on board with that. Yeah.
I suppose a little bit. Yeah, there is definitely still a gap in in Australia between I suppose white people and Indigenous people. But
I'll just put you on screen here while I deal with my child that just walked in the room here.
that's all right.
There you go.
Yeah, but I suppose that was where the interest was driven from. And then when I started looking into it, it really struck me that a lot of the language service providers in Australia tend not to either offer Indigenous language interpreting or advertise that they do it. And this might be jumping ahead a bit because I think we're going to get to this later on. But yeah, that was sort of then where I went from. And that's, I don't want to necessarily claim to be an expert on that by any means.
No, yeah. Like full disclaimer, this is just a little research project. This is not, we do not claim to be experts on Aboriginal languages. What we are is fascinated by language, fascinated by culture, and very fortunate to have a job where we can talk about this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, I was so lucky that this was basically the last week or so for me was just looking into this, which was just something that I was really interested in. So so this graph is the list of the most spoken languages. So the 10 most spoken I think I've got up there, and you can see so the number one is 4,000 and something speakers. I think it's 4,300 or something, right down to the last one there, which is 990 I think it was. And that's obviously in 2016. So the numbers will have changed since then. But it is worth pointing out that there's also two Creoles, which generally have more speakers. So I think one of them is actually called Creole and has about 7,000 speakers, and that's spelt differently. Called Creole.
I was going to say there's got to be like 100 languages in the world that are called Creole.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like what they're called, depending upon the region.
Yeah. So Australia's claimed one of those. But I've tended not to include them in this just because they're not considered traditional Indigenous languages. And I also, just a quick note for anyone, I'm not sure how much people know about Australian Indigenous culture. When I say Indigenous, that covers Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. So we don't like to say.
I was going to ask.
Yeah.
I was going to ask.
Aboriginal is mainland Australian peoples, and Torres Strait Island is sort of up on the north coast of Australia. But generally when we say Indigenous and it's capitalised, that's encompassing the whole group of Indigenous languages and peoples and cultures.
These fun facts and more in the upcoming report from Hannah Leske here. And I'm smirking because I just love learning stuff like this. And this is not rehearsed, right? I conned Hannah into doing this with me yesterday. So I'm learning along with you if you're watching along at home. Let's go on to the next little tidbit that you got for us here.
Yeah, cool.
All right.
So that
and this is no. We got a better one than this here. Bam.
Yeah. So this is something that again stood out to me personally. So for anyone watching along at home who isn't Australian, Centrelink is our version of like welfare, I suppose. I think you call it welfare in the States.
Yeah, we call it many things depending upon. It's one of those terms. It's like, there's how the Eskimos have a lot of words for snow, or the Inuits, I think they're called now.
Yes.
We Americans have a lot of terms for welfare, depending upon how, because it's such a politically charged thing. But it's called welfare.
Yes. Yeah. So Centrelink is our welfare system, and this is just it's probably unfair of me to pinpoint them necessarily, but it caught my attention because it is accessed, disproportionately by Indigenous peoples, and it really surprised me, I suppose, maybe before I did some more digging, that there's no written translated documents on the Centrelink website in any Indigenous languages. So not in any Creoles, not in, the largest ones, not in any of the ones that are spoken in Canberra or, like any of there's nothing. There's a small note on one page that I could find that basically said Indigenous interpreters are available, but I think you have to book it. And if you don't have the knowledge to get to that site, and if you don't have the English capacity to understand that really small note, you've basically got no language help there, which I thought was just hugely unfair, given that that's a lot of the people who need to use the services that they provide.
Yeah, and it's not something unique to Australia by any stretch of the
No.
imagination, right? We like here in the States too, we have regulations, laws about who should get interpreting services. Like interpreting services are a right for a lot of different things in a lot of different situations, and not only that, it's like there's laws that you have to make people aware that it's their right, because if you don't know it's your right, then
Yeah.
you're not going to take advantage of it. So you go to any hospital and there will be like this big bilingual poster with 20 different languages that says, did you know that you have the right to ask for an interpreter, right? So it's that kind of thing. And a lot of companies, a lot of governments, local, at different levels, they're under a mandate to provide language services, but it's really not sketchy. It's really not clearly defined, like how they need to. So it's like by how the laws are written, they could probably just get away with using machine translation, right?
Yeah, that's true. And I wonder how many of them do. This is very off topic, actually. Well, not entirely, but I'll
like
say
going
anyway.
off topic. It's cool.
Okay. But yeah, on the machine translation note, and I don't know if this was a case of machine translation, but last year with, COVID and everything in Australia, Melbourne, people may have heard about this, Melbourne had a particularly bad, by Australian standards, case or outbreak of COVID. And a lot of that...
Last year was not Australia's year. Last year was not the world's year.
It was not the world's year. I think Australia, I mean,
you guys
maybe
like
an
burnt down to the ground. Like the rest of the world just saw like pictures of like crying koala bears, and it was just everyone was like, oh, everyone was going through some shit, but
Yeah.
at least it wasn't as bad as Australia. So thank you for making us all feel a little bit, but no, I joke. But
Well, I mean, I'm glad that you see it that way, because I think we were pretty lucky last year. I mean,
yeah.
Environmentally, not so much. There was the bushfires and the floods, and it was all a big, rich tapestry of disaster. But as far as COVID went, I think we came out relatively unscathed. But
so young and optimistic. Oh, besides the fires and the plague and it was a good year. It was a good year. I love it.
No, I mean, environmental disasters is a whole different topic. But yeah.
All right, where were we?
Sorry,
before I derailed you completely.
This is still off topic, but
machine translation.
That's okay. Yeah, so the COVID outbreak in Melbourne was largely, a lot of the blame was pinned on immigrant populations, and a lot of that was due to misinformation. And again, I don't know everything about this. I don't really want to speak on it too much, but I think when you talk about whether they can provide machine translation, I think that's a really interesting observation, because clearly the interpreting and the translation services provided last year around like health advice and that sort of thing weren't adequate. And I'm sure they've been improved since. But it's just interesting.
And that's something that I'd really like to, and I don't want to talk about it either. Not because I don't want to talk about it, because I'm not qualified to talk about it, but I'd love to talk to somebody that is about the role of language in the, you're talking about certain communities, immigrant communities got blamed during the pandemic, and I'm assuming we're talking about we would call them Asian Americans, right? Here in the U.S. And there was backlash against that, and there's movements, there's Stop Asian Hate, there's hashtags, there's all of these things, and I'm fascinated. I'm always fascinated to talk about the role that language, and specifically access to language access, plays in stopping hate, I guess, would be the way.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? Or
yeah.
that's a little melodramatic, perhaps. Let's start with like access to welfare, right?
Yeah.
And then
Well,
we'll.
yeah, I think that it is fair to make a connection, maybe not between hate, but between societal awareness, and that may be cultural more so than language, but societal awareness and tolerance. Like there's
Mm,
definitely a link there. So
this has
yeah.
been the year for societal awareness about many, many things.
Mm, yes. But yeah,
So,
anyway, that's
speaking
on
of
topic.
awareness, speaking of awareness, how are we going to keep awareness alive for these? God, that was a horrible segue. Um, Talk to me about this. Language
Um,
preservations projects. Who's out
yeah,
there
okay.
doing good work in this area? What do we need to know about them?
This is again something that I haven't been able to find particularly conclusive information on, and I think so. What I have found is that it's not very centralized. So you can find projects run by small community groups and that sort of thing all over Australia. But finding really comprehensive information about which programs are run is difficult because everyone's running their own to a certain extent.
Yeah.
And so this is just a list that I put up there, and this is probably applicable to the whole world, but these are
Yeah.
some of the projects that
I was
are
going to
being.
say this stuff could apply anywhere,
Yeah, yeah,
because pretty much anywhere that was had a colonial situation going on, has this challenge. Like we have it
yeah,
here in the Pacific Northwest. There's native languages that are going extinct. And
yeah.
I know our colleague Bob Drake and Michael Reed over at Multilingual,
Yes,
they've got connections to the tribes over there, and we're always publishing stuff about that in
yeah,
Multilingual.
yeah. So I spoke with them actually in the research
You
for
did.
this. Yeah, and it was a very interesting conversation with both of them. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
would love to chat again.
You get Bob and Michael in the same room. And you just sit back with the drink and just enjoy the ride.
Yeah,
It's better than
yeah.
National Geographic Channel. I'm telling you.
It was great. Yeah, definitely. They both know so much. But yeah, it was interesting as well to get an American perspective or a North American perspective. I don't know what the correct, how you guys like to refer to
I
yourselves.
identify as no, I don't know, American. Well, us Americans. Think how arrogant that actually is. That people from the United States of America refer to themselves as Americans, right? This has been
Yeah.
pointed out to me quite a bit. By who? Guess South Americans. Like, why do you Americans? You get to walk around. It's like how people who went to Berkeley, shout out Nika, say, "Oh, I went to Cal." What? There's other colleges in California. Oh, what do you get? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do I have
Well,
another slide that I can awkwardly transition to here,
there probably is one.
or have we done this promote public usage of indigenous?
Oh, I mean, this slide's pretty much self-explanatory,
Yeah.
to be honest. Yeah, it was just. Oh, this one. Okay. Do you want to go to the
Yes.
next slide first? If
Yes.
there's another one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I think it's more relevant. Yeah. So this one is just again reasonably self-explanatory, but this was just an example of a couple. So sort of the decentralized system, but this is a couple of language programs that there are, and I know that there's hundreds more. But these two had a fair bit of information, and both of them actually are in New South Wales. And it's an interesting thing when we're talking about regulations and governments and that sort of thing earlier. A lot of language access regulations are set at the state level, particularly when it comes to Indigenous languages. Yeah, so
Yeah.
I mean, the Northern Territory in Australia do quite well because I think it's like 51% of Indigenous language users live in the Northern Territory. So I don't know if that's the exact stat, but it's 50 something percent. And so they obviously have a high demand for interpreting services and that sort of thing. And they've got more, children who are starting schools who, don't have perhaps any English background. So, you look
Well,
at different states have different levels, but these two are both in New South Wales. And New South Wales was the first state to, I think, have a formal language protection policy.
oh,
It was only it was from 2017, and it was only implemented last year. So that shows you how far Australia has to go.
it's pretty good for government bureaucracy, if I don't say so. It's
Yeah,
Yeah, they'd still be having planning committees here in Washington State. So
Okay, well there
good,
you go.
good job, New South
Good
Wales.
job, New South Wales. Yeah, but yeah, so that was just two examples of language programs that are available. So one of them is a school where I think 100% of the year 7 students, which for us is the first year of high school in New South Wales, have to do, well, are expected, I suppose, to do a foreign language, and that language is the
Oh,
language which I'm going to try and pronounce.
well, that was kind of my question. Are these like instructing non-speakers of it, or are these program like classes in native languages, in the indigenous languages?
There's a combination.
Okay.
As far as I know, and again, I might be wrong on this, but my understanding is that there's not actually any schools in Australia who offer like the core curriculum in any Indigenous
Okay,
languages.
that's what I was
Um,
asking. Yeah.
yeah, there might be a couple, particularly maybe in Central Australia. I'm thinking Northern Territory, Northern SA, Western Australia. I'm not sure, but I haven't been able to find any.
And
But
does
yes,
does
that
this
first one is for English speakers learning a foreign language.
so that I think that's awesome. I think that's way
Hmm.
cooler because it's
Yeah.
getting people excited about it. It's I hate to say the word normalizing, because that implies that it's not normal to, but bringing it into the public, you know,
Yeah.
dialogue, literally bringing it into the
Yeah.
public dialogue, right? So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. I think it's really cool. So I studied languages at university at the University of Adelaide, which actually offers I think Ghana, and so one of the Indigenous languages. They only offer one, but they offer it, and I never considered taking it, to be honest. And I kind of wish I had. But yeah, it was a lot of language education in Australia is sort of Euro focused or maybe Asian focused now. It's very much outward looking. So there's very few universities or schools that do offer Indigenous languages. I think there's 7 universities offering 7 different Indigenous languages around Australia, which actually is not a bad percentage when it comes to the number of
I
universities.
was gonna say
Yeah,
it's better than zero, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's doing good. Let's go
yeah.
to bam.
This one.
These
So this
are
is
providers,
yes, and
interpretation
this is
providers.
what I would love to learn more about.
So
So anyone
these
who
are
knows
these are the
anything about
guys that you
anything,
call guys if you're ever like me and got stuck in a situation where it's like your client has a request for a language you've never heard of, an indigenous Australia. These are the guys you call. They'll hook you up. They'll hook you up right here. Let me bring them back on screen.
yes, yeah. So the biggest one is right in the middle there, the Aboriginal Interpreter Service
Mm?
in Northern Territory, and that seems to be the one that most companies will recommend. It's sort of the biggest. That and the Aboriginal Interpreting Western Australia company. So those two, yeah, tend to be promoted the most. And they offer, I think the Aboriginal Interpreter Service offers like 100 different languages or something like that. It was really cool. 2M language services up there. That one was actually one that, so Sarah, one of a Nimdzi colleague, is in touch with them. And so they have the government contract, I think, and correct me on this, 2M language services if I'm wrong, but I think they hold the Queensland Indigenous interpreting
Oh, okay.
contract.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
Refer to
yeah,
Sarah for further
yes.
clarification.
Yeah, so I'm actually, well,
Actual report is pending. This
yeah.
is not a report. This is more akin to a podcast than a report. So if you're watching this being like, you are wrong, well,
Yeah,
good. Call us
definitely.
and tell us why we're wrong so we can put it in
Yeah.
the report.
Happy to be corrected on this because yeah, this is still coming. I still need to learn these things. But yeah, the ABC multilingual is actually one in Adelaide, and they are recommended. So the South Australian government has a policy around interpreting for Indigenous languages, and it on its website recommends the AIS and ABC multilingual. So that was sort of where I got some of the. I think Goldfields is also in Western Australia. So that's a brief summary, probably not the most interesting part of this podcast, but of all the interpreting and translating and LSPs in Australia, they were the only ones that I could find that actually offer Indigenous interpreting or translating. And again, please correct me if I'm wrong. I would love there to be more. but I thought that it was quite interesting that there weren't more.
Yeah, it's one of those challenging things, having been in the biz for a while. Like I can tell you a lot of these agencies, like they may be competing with each other, but they're probably calling the same people to
Yeah,
actually fill the jobs, right? So it's like
yeah,
it doesn't matter who the company is, and because of that, it's actually really hard to actually track and report on what services LSPs, language service providers, actually offer, because if you call an LSP, who's going to pick up the phone? Salesperson, right?
yeah.
And you say, hey, can you give yes? That's always the answer, right? That's what I tell LSPs to say, like when we consult with LSPs. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
one of those things that's really hard to track, because if you called me at one of my past jobs, I didn't even work in interpreting, and you said, "Hey Tucker, oh I got this urgent project for," mm, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce those ones, and I've got a kid here
That's right.
asking for
Ghana's
Legos.
the easiest.
Ghana.
You can
Oh, that's the
Ghana,
way.
yeah.
Okay. I had a client asking for Ghana. I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, sure, I can totally do that. I can totally do it. And then I'd call one of these guys.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's what I
Yeah.
say.
I think it's the other challenge, I suppose, is that if there's only 6 speakers of a language, there's not going to be a formal interpreter, because there's, the likelihood of that is very low. So that's one of the main challenges, I suppose, with interpreting for languages like this.
Yeah,
But
we need to get Sarah on to talk about all of these challenges, and she can
yeah,
you and her, I'm sure, could just geek out with her bringing the interpreting background to it. I'm
yeah,
sure. Well,
yeah,
Hannah, I think I've run out of slides, and I've got
yeah,
kids running in and out. The sun's down. I mean, it may be Friday and sunny for you, but it's dark and still Thursday for me. So, with that, I want to say thank you very much for coming on. It was
you're welcome.
a pleasure to have you. Once again, if you guys are watching, if you guys have made it this far, I think Hannah agreed to go on with this yesterday. I think yesterday was the first time you and I have ever spoken. Is that true?
Yeah,
Like one on
yeah,
one.
yeah,
So, which is that's bad. That's my bad. As no, I fail. I'm failing you guys. I need to do more outreach. So, thank you for being my victim. Any closing words
Oh, now you put me on the
on the
spot.
spot?
Um, no, I don't think so. I guess, I mean, there's so much more you could say, and there's obviously it's a huge topic and a huge issue, and it extends far beyond Australia. But yeah, I don't know. No closing comments. Just that I hope everyone found it interesting, because I find it very interesting.
Well, we did. I did. I did. And I'm looking forward to having you back on, maybe when the report's released, maybe when we got something else to go over. With that, thank you everybody for watching. Once again, this is published by Nimdzi Insights. We do market research and consulting, specifically for the language services industry, but really for anybody that wants to go global. A number of different ways that we do that: through process audits, technology audits, market research. It's too late. I've been doing this too long. I can't give you guys a sales pitch, and I'm also noticing that my fonts are all messed up on that. So there goes my slick slideshow. Thank you guys. We're gonna quit while we are somewhat ahead. Ciao.
See you, Tucker.